that's a bad day.
Yeah.
The state's got a decontamination plan. There's 92 units across the state. Each hospital has a unit, and there's one for each district. Orange is the one for our district. Basically, that's what it looks like. So if there was people exposed to a chemical, we would run them through there, get the chemicals off so that they go into the hospital, they're already decontaminated. There's plans like the ChemPack plan, so if there's ever a nerve agent that's released and we need to mitigate those resources, we have those plans. We have 25 dam failure plans in the dispatch center. Some of them are cascading, so if there's a dam failure here, it's also going to take out this dam and then the next dam and so on and so forth. Railroad incidents, we just had a railroad training for our dispatchers about a week, 2 weeks ago. Vermont Yankee, we've got plans for them, evacuation plans. We're working with the Franklin County Boards of Health. We're still mitigating through that plan, trying to make sure everything works out. Mass casualty incident plans, we also work with the EMS community to make sure that we have those things covered. We try and keep track of all the state and regional assets. So if someone buys a new communications vehicle, or the state gets a new vehicle, so that when the fire chiefs call up or the police chiefs call up and say, I need X, we know where to get X. Other resources like shelter trailers, lighting units, foam units. I mentioned the incident support unit already, the rehab unit, that takes care of the firefighters, so firefighters have a place to rest on scene. Tax stacks, basically, they've developed a statewide plan of communications assets that are mountaintop. So if we're calling in somebody mutual aid, we can kick up the tower at the mountaintop so that if one person is talking on one frequency and somebody else is talking on another frequency, we can marry them together so that they can actually communicate. They have units now that can replace, so if a tornado goes through and wipes out Shelburne Mountain, they can drive a truck up, park it on top of Shelburne Mountain, and reestablish communications where they're gone. CERT teams, there's community emergency response teams. The state police has probably 15, 20 different teams, you know, everything from canines to mounted unit to the underwater response team, all of those things. National Guard, fire towers. There's a nuclear phone that's connected directly to Vermont Yankee, which is a NAS phone, stands for Nuclear Alert System. There's a NAWAS phone, is part of our district control point, again for fire mobilizations. That hooks us directly to MEMA and actually the federal government as well. It goes back to civil defense from the 1950s. National Alert Warning System.
So they can call you direct, right?
Yeah, yeah. And if we call for a task force, we hop right on that phone because it automatically notifies everybody in the state. Radio caches, the health alert network, we're connected into that. Weather warnings, we have specialty resources like the state police dive team, Northfield dive team we dispatch for. And we try to maintain tri-state equipment lists, Berkshire County equipment lists, and mid-state equipment lists. So when somebody gets a new fire engine, when somebody gets a new tanker, we try to gather our arms all around that information. So if all of a sudden Chief Enier calls up and says, hey, you know, I need 500 gallons of foam, we can satisfy that need.
Who's the tri in the tri-state?
It is Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. We have mass fatality plans, again, statewide fire mobilization plans, lots of mutual aid plans, traffic management plans, evacuation plans, shelter plans. You know, there's seems like there's new plans coming out all the time, and we struggle to get our arms around that. And that's really where we can work closer together. The more updated, better information that we can get, the better job we can do for you when you need it. Here's where we can work closer together. Cheryl mentioned in Buckland they have a checklist. So something comes in, it's a new business, check right on the checklist, fax it to the dispatch center. Road races, roads closed, you're having an event in your community and you're shutting down streets. Now all of a sudden we're trying to dispatch an ambulance through there, we don't know the streets are shut down. any information that you can give us that enables us to do a better job so that we can then provide a better level of service to your community, we would love to have that interaction. Employee status, lots of times police chiefs will change, fire chiefs will change, we'll read it in the newspaper instead of getting a notification from a community. Street lists, as people change every year, assessors maps, town maps, hydrant information, water sources, DPW lists, business lists. Select board contacts, someone calls up and says, hey, I'm from town X and I'm the head of the select board. Are they, aren't they? And again, talking to Cheryl and Carolyn, we know that you're asked probably 100 times for certain information. With MEMA, when they went around to all the towns, they said, hey, we'll protect your information, we won't give anybody access to it. Well, that includes us. We don't have access to your emergency plans because MEMA won't give us access because it's basically the town's property, if you will. So if you have a good scent plan and you have all your shelters and everything identified in there and you're willing to share it with us, we would love to have it so that we can, again, assist you when you need the help. Reverse 911s, for example, there's lots of schools that have reverse 911, there's lots of communities that have reverse 911. So if you don't want to give us access, that's fine, because we understand that you paid for it and there may or may not be a cost associated with it. But if you just tell us, hey, call Cheryl Dukes and wake her up, we would be happy to do that, we just need the name. We just need the name. Name and a phone number, we're glad to help. And our mid-shifts, they like to wake up people. There's our phone number. Probably most of you call it at one point or another. We have a fax line. If you have a fax, you have information you want to get out to the 3 or 4 towns around you. We have group faxes set up for police departments, for fire departments, for select boards. We'd be happy to pass on information.
Alrighty. So next on up is Bob Judd. Thank you, Butch. Don't go too far.
I am the Emergency Management Director for the City of Greenfield. The most important part of an Emergency Management Director is to plan for the worst case scenario. I have been an advocate for emergency response in my community, and many times I have heard it's not going to happen here. We don't have to worry about it. 1938 hurricane was once every 100 years. We don't have to wait till after 1938. We've had 2 100-year floods within the last couple of years. Your emergency management director should be mitigating some known threats within your community. If you have a culvert in your community that has been identified as not being able to hold up to the floods, they should be working with you to help mitigate that problem, either by going for grants or things like that. The next phase is response. That's where we're going to kick into what we're going to be talking about. That's opening the EOC and doing the coordination and all that stuff. And the last one, and very important one, is recovery. How do we get past the event? How do we get past the disaster that we just had? How do we recover from it? A little while ago, not too long ago, it's in people's minds, there was a rain event. To give you an example of what I faced on that day that Irene hit, we had a housing complex with over 100 tenants that had to be evacuated. We had to evacuate a neighborhood on Deerfield Street. The Arbors in our community, which is 100 and something elderly assisted living housing project, needed to be evacuated. As the event started unfolding, we had multiple rescues going on. We had a bunch of propane tanks floating down the river. We had a dam failure. We lost one of our drinking supplies in town. We lost a main sewer line going from the west part of town. We lost our sewer plant. We had millions of gallons of sewer a day dumping into the river. 2 shelters had to be opened up. We needed generators for certain critical infrastructure within town. We had failure of our internet, failure of our cell phones. Route 91 was closed, Route 5 and 10 was closed, Route 2 was closed. If anybody knows Greenfield, that's basically everything in and out of the town. There was no mutual aid available. Called Shelburne Control and asked for some fire assistance. Initially, while the event was going on, it was said, you have nobody coming. You're on your own for a little bit. We had rumors of a dam failure, and then to add everything on top of that, the state called and said, hey, we've got 400 responders coming to your city, and we're gonna put them at GCC, and they're gonna be there, and they're gonna be available for the county response. And within 4 or 5 hours, sure enough, 400 responders showed up in the community, and I get a call in the height of the event saying, you need to feed these 400 and something people. So that just goes to show you what you can face as an emergency management director. Now the city of Greenfield, we were actually pretty fortunate because we knew for 3 weeks that the rain was coming. So we had meetings every couple days leading up to the event. And then twice a day before the event happened. We secured some equipment that we thought we would need. We pre-staged road signs in the parts of town we thought were going to get flooded. We had a finance person come aboard, and she created a line item in the budget specifically for this event.
Huh.
So anything that was charged under this line item. It was made clear to all the department heads through our finance people. Everything finance-wise gets tracked, submitted right away. Doesn't get submitted for the normal warrant. You'll do that down the road, but we want to know right away what you're putting in for reimbursement or for costs. City of Greenfield's damages were well over $15 million at the end of it, and that doesn't include personnel costs and equipment costs and stuff like that. There's 2 other things that happened during that event. At about 2 hours into the event, Western Mass Electric Company came to the EOC and said, we're shutting the power off to the entire community. And within 5 minutes of that conversation, I had Berkshire Gas, who feeds just about all of the downtown area with gas, come into the EOC and say, we're about to lose the main plant down on Mill Street. We're going to shut gas off to the whole city.
Wow.
That is a big, big deal. That means when they put it back on, they're going to have to go to every house and every pilot light and relight it. So we had 2 major things happen within this event. And it got to be a little overwhelming. And I remember looking over to my town official. The mayor was out of town, and the acting mayor was there. She could tell that, oh my God, she could see it on my face. This is bad. This is as bad as I've seen it since I've been involved. And all that she did was turn to me and went like that. And I knew it was going to be okay. And a lot of people think, what's my role as a town head in an event? I had a mayor ask me once, I don't feel like I'm doing anything here. I don't feel like I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I told the mayor, just be there. People are looking to the town officials, the people that run the town, when everything's going bad and when it's all overwhelming. They look at the people, and just to see them calm and being there, and just being there is huge. As an emergency management director, that was huge for me just to have that. So the other parts that you need to know about being town officials, has anybody ever seen a declaration of emergency form? Okay, that's a form you need to get familiar with. If you're going to declare a declaration of emergency in your town, that's the first thing you should do. Your emergency management director should be handing you that form, and you should be filling it out, because that's the first form that they're going to look at for reimbursement. Now, everybody knows that just because the governor declares an emergency doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get money back. All right? So if you spend money, and your emergency management director spends your money for the community, you're still responsible for that money. Somebody asked about how would you identify people's roles within the EOC. In my EOC, I have a status board on the wall, and it says who's in charge, and it's who's the operations boss, who's the plan boss, who's the PIO. We have Web EOC. We have maps all over my EOC. We have a couple different maps. We have the Vermont Yankee map that shows wind direction from Vermont Yankee relative to Vermont Yankee. So we know where the plume, if there was a plume, where it would be going. We have a flood map. We have the 100-year flood map. We have maps for dam failures. What would be affected by a dam failure? Where's your special needs list? Is it accurate? When's the last time it was up to date? How do you access it? Is it on a computer? Is it on a piece of paper? Now let's talk a little bit about staffing. My staffing is, we have command. Basically the command is a unified command among the department heads, but ultimately when the mayor declares a town-law state of emergency, it's his ball now. What he in turn does is delegates what he wants to happen during the emergency to his emergency management director. He relies on me to give him the information from the emergency side of it, so he can be better formed to make decisions. And a lot of times he's hands off with it. He may interject, but he lets his department heads do what they need to do. We have a PIO. In my town, it's the mayor. The mayor has opted to be the PIO for the community. We may designate somebody to write stuff for the mayor, to get the stuff ready. We may designate a PIO, but he wants to keep the PIO for himself until he designates it out. That's his right. It's you know, he wants to be the spokesman for the community. It's all what you're comfortable with. We have an operations guy. I told you about the finance person. We have a finance person. We have a shelter coordinator, which is my health agent for the town. And then more important, one of the most important jobs that's often overlooked is our scribe. We have somebody taking notes. Because you'd be surprised in what you'd miss. Somebody's called in something that wasn't written down, now you didn't do it, something happens, somebody gets hurt, you're not liable for that. The other thing we do is try to build out a second shift. Who's gonna do it once we go past the 12 hours, 16 hours, 20 hours? In my case, during Irene for the overnight shift, I have relationships with other emergency management directors that weren't affected. In the case of Irene, it was a couple gentlemen from Northampton and a couple gentlemen from East Hampton. They came up and relieved me and ran my EOC. I set what the expectations were. I gave them what, you know, parameters to work within. But I had that relationship with these fellows to know that the community is in good hands and we can turn it over to them. You do have to be aware of work to rest ratio within emergency services. We never hear about that because we're all small communities. So our people are there for 20 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. Let me ask you a question. You have an emergency management director that's making calls and he's now 30 hours into an incident. Is he making the right calls with no sleep? Should he be relieved? If he makes a call that there's a mistake, is there some liability that could be there? Absolutely. If you have firefighters or police officers that have been working 48 hours and they've been given no rest and they crashed the car going home at the end of it, is the town liable for that? They're finding that liability with the work to rest ratio more and more. Not so much on the local side and the local government, but a lot within the federal government. And anything that happens within the federal government ends up trickling down to the locals. So I'm pretty sure within the next few years you're going to see that going to be an issue.
Also coming up, does the City of Greenfield ever do IAPs, the incident action plans for stuff like this?
We do. Any planned events within the community, we do an IEP.
Right.
And if it's a longer event where it's going more than 12 hours, because that's our typical operational period, we'll develop an IEP. And that's how I knew I spelled out who was going to be in charge, what engine companies we have coming in, and that kind of stuff. Another thing that's really important is every half hour to an hour, make sure you're doing briefings. Every half hour, an hour. Stop what's going on in the room. Fire, what's going on? Police, what do you have going? Health, what do you have going? And go around the room and just make sure everybody's on the same page. If you don't do that, people are going to start wanting to pull them back together. And the phones are going to be ringing in the background and you're going to have a lot going on, but you still got to make an effort to do a briefing. Brief it every half hour to an hour. Mutual aid, know what you have for resources, police, fire, DPW. You know, what does it mean if you call the National Guard? If it's not a declared emergency within the community, within the state, if it's not a federal declared emergency, and you call for the National Guard, you could be billed for that. The average unit that responds is about $15,000 a day. And the last thing I want to talk about, let me hit the IAP real quick. Within my city, we any planned event, we do an IAP. Document that spells out who's doing what, how we're talking to each other, who's in charge, what are our safety concerns, what are our mitigation issues, what is the medical plan, and we actually develop an IAP. It takes a while, because usually it's one person doing it. When you call it a team, the whole team puts it together. But in my case, it's one or two people doing it. And we have a document. And that document's a legal document for the incident. And like my 4th of July, my first couple of years that we did this, we handed out IAPs. Excuse me. In the IAP was a traffic plan with all the road closure signs and how many signs we needed where and where we needed police officers and whatnot. And we handed them out at the incident, and we had a sergeant on the police force that I don't need it. I know what my assignment is, I know what we're doing. The incident starts going on, it's a planned incident. He starts calling on the radio asking for questions about signs and traffic direction. It's in your IAP. Well, I don't have one. Why don't you have one? Well, I didn't want one, I didn't need one. We've come a long way since then. And that's a matter of the town officials saying to your police and fire, you will have a seat at the table, you will sit down and you will communicate, and we will develop an IEP. That's a key role that the town officials need to take on. Doesn't have to be elaborate, it's just a plan that everybody can read and be on the same page. So when the sergeant that wasn't part of the planning process comes in, you hand him the document, he knows exactly what's expected of him. And the last thing is that I want to talk about is when there's an emergency, my mayor is ultimately responsible for what's going on. He lets his department heads handle what they need to handle. He doesn't get involved with the tactics or the operations or things like that. He trusts his people to do that. He's not getting down into the weeds. He's looking at the big picture. How do I protect my community? How do I protect the people in my town? What kind of message do I want to get out to my community? What kind of information do I need to get out? Where do I, my emergency management director is recommending a shelter. We're getting pushback from the school. The school is where we want to have the shelter. He's the one that takes care of that, communicating and handling the political aspect of it. But ultimately knows that as soon as his name goes on that piece of paper, he owns it. He owns that incident. And that's why having a good overview of how the incident command system works, even though it's really dry, we all know it's really dry, but having an overview of how the incident command system works makes your people in the field lives a little easier, because now you have an understanding exactly what they're doing. And I'll end it by saying, when an event happens, we seem to isolate ourselves within our little community. Just remember, you're not alone. Because especially like an Irene or a tornado event, there's other communities involved. It's okay to pick up the phone and say, hey Carolyn, I got this going on. We're thinking about opening a shelter. Have you thought about opening a shelter? Well, yeah, we're thinking about it. Well, you want to kind of do it together. Yeah, we don't have an agreement. You should have agreements beforehand. But work with your neighbors on it. And a lot of times we don't do that because we're so isolated with fixing our own little issue. Reach out to your neighbors and see, hey, what's going on? In one of our windstorm events that we had that was isolated to 4 or 5 communities, we ended up putting a request in for MEMA for all the communities for tree crews. Tree crews came to Greenfield, and we controlled them out of Greenfield and sent them to the communities that needed them. And when they went to Coleraine, they got the job done. They came back to Greenfield and went to Leiden, and they went to the other communities. We felt that it worked better for us to do it that way than getting assignments from Framingham that aren't familiar with the area. So, work with your neighbors is what what the biggest message is. Tracy?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between EOC and incident command post? Who sits in each, where each are located, and what their roles are?
Yeah, if you have an incident such as, say, a hazardous materials incident, where it's in a geographical area, the incident command post is gonna be out in the field, making the command decisions out there and calling resources in from the EOC. When you have a community-wide event, the command post can be the EOC, but it kind of shifts the role of the EOC. Remember, the EOC is logistical support for the incident. It's getting the resources that are needed to complete it. And it's also a place for the big decision makers to make the decision. So in an isolated event, your command post is gonna be out in the field, but the EOC could be operating, getting the supplies they need for the operation that's out in the field. Did I answer that close enough?
Where do you see a selectman perhaps sitting?
EOC, always at the EOC. You may wanna visit the command post, and that's your right to, and wave the flag that, hey, I'm at the EOC if you need something, but, I want you to know that I'm there, I want you to know that I'm participating in this event. Some selectmen are really good, and wanna be out and witness, what's going on and just to be there. Some selectmen or mayors wanna come and take over an incident. That's not really, you've got your professionals to do that. My mayor wants to be notified of any significant event that affects lives of people in our community. He wants to be there to be able to go to the family that just had the large house fire and lost everything and say, what can we do as a city of Greenfield? He's very good at that. He's very active with that. So he gets notified on any significant event that we have in town. That's his choice. That's what he's comfortable with. I actually like it when he shows up at an incident because he's waving the flag for the community.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of well thought out policies and procedures. Do you have them all pulled together in one document that some people call an EOP?
Yep. We have specific plan documents for events. Like we have a nuclear plan, we have a dam plan, we have a flooding plan, we have plans. And then we have the overall town plan, which is a comprehensive plan, where that's all put in together, where all the resources are listed, where all the critical infrastructure is listed, where all the key contact people are listed, where all your really important information is put in. Your evacuation plans, how to notify people, how do you call people if there's an event, all that's put into one document. The other document that it has, the other place for storage, is the institutional knowledge. It's the brain bucket up here. Most of it you should find someplace, but a lot of that is that institutional knowledge.
But some of us are very new.
Yep.
It's
And I
hard
go-
to pass that stuff on from one person to another just by talking.
And I go back to the original comment that I said earlier, you're not alone when you come to emergency planning. Bob Escott, Chief Escott has been in the field for 30 years. Chief Vanier has been in the field for 30 years. They're both emergency management directors. I'm an emergency management director for the city of Greenfield. Any one of us would welcome a phone call and say, hey, let's go out and have a cup of coffee and let's talk about some of the things that we're working on in my community and bounce it off. And we can help and say, this worked for us, this didn't work for us. But it's that getting to the RAPC meetings, getting to the emergency management meetings, and just having that relationship with your other emergency management directors. That's how I learned most of the stuff that I had.
And this is where I would jump in too and say that it comes down, again, I encourage the emergency management team meetings, if you will, getting your department heads together and discussing this. Because on a town by town basis, there are some towns that open their emergency operations centers routinely. And it's worth talking then, in what cases would we open EOC? And if we open EOC, how would that work?
Yeah, a good EOC is a philosophy too. It's the buying in of the concept of the EOC. In my community, that was difficult for many years. They didn't feel the need to send a police officer to the EOC, a firefighter to the EOC, DPW boss to the EOC. But when we had events, and because of the leadership that we had in our town, my government in my town, that said, no, you will be at these events, and you will send somebody that can make a decision for your agency at the event. Pulling them all together when we had an event, it started working really well. Because when we had, say, something simple, a tree's down blocking a main route, all right, we're gonna need firemen with chainsaw, police officer for traffic, and the highway department with a backloader to push the trees. You turn to all three of them, got it, we're gonna meet here and we're gonna go get this done. And all three agencies are working together, rather than, all right, the tree crew's out there, now we need to send a police officer for traffic, and now, well, you know, we could use another chainsaw, so let's send the fire. Decisions are made all together, and the resources are deployed because of it. It works so well. I will leave you all with this. A good functioning EOC or command staff is very hard for any community, including my own. You may want to start considering talking to your neighbors about combining efforts when it comes to emergency preparedness and emergency response and emergency operations. In my opinion, and I own my opinion, I don't think we need 32 dedicated EOCs within Franklin County. I think every town is responsible for their own, but I think we could separate some of that and communities work together out of one EOC. Instead of having so many people at each EOC making the calls for the resources, we could function better if we cooperate. Which is something I'd like to see as we go further, is some type of regional effort with when you talk an EOC. You're not gonna take away the responsibility of the community. You're not gonna take away the EMD's responsibility or your fire chief's responsibility. But I think there could be more coordination that goes on at the local level within a confined area.
I mean, I just have to say, I participated in the regional EOC. It's very supportive, and it makes a better decision of where to allocate the resources. It gives you a bigger picture, because you do become isolated in your own community.
And also remember, you do have other resources that can come into play. You know, MEMA can provide assistance. There's a local incident management team that would happy to come in to assist. We have to work together, because we just don't have the resources. It was a pleasure speaking with you folks tonight.
It's really important.
Thank you all for being here.
Is anyone
Thank you,
not
everybody.
coming to the